The story begins not with a rush, but with a calm breath. You are invited to let go of the day, to feel the weight of time slow, and to imagine yourself settling into a space of quiet comfort. As you close your eyes or soften your gaze, the world around you begins to blur and fade, and a new one, older, more mysterious, and filled with ancient whispers, takes its place. This is the world of Jason and the Argonauts, one of the great myths of ancient Greece, a tale of voyages across uncertain seas, of courage and companionship, of magic and betrayal, and of treasures that shimmer beyond reach. Yet here, it is not told as a hurried adventure, but as a steady tide washing upon the shore, soothing in rhythm, inviting in tone. Imagine yourself resting on the deck of a great wooden ship, the night sky wide and endless above, filled with stars that glimmer like silver sparks scattered by unseen hands. The wood beneath you creaks softly, the sea laps gently against the hull, and in that sound, you find yourself floating between waking and dreaming. The story that follows will flow in that same gentle rhythm, guiding you through myth without haste, allowing each detail to drift in like a breeze. As the tale unfolds, there will be no urgency, no need to hold on tightly. You may drift in and out, following only what lingers in your thoughts, knowing the story continues whether or not you remain awake. The legend of Jason is more than a tale of heroism. It is a tapestry woven from history, belief, and imagination. For centuries, it has been told and retold around firelight, on parchment, in temples, and in hushed tones before sleep. It has comforted those who needed to believe in destiny, and entertained those who sought the thrill of adventure. Tonight, it will serve another purpose, to gently cradle you into rest, even as you listen. Every word will be a small wave, every scene a drifting cloud, every pause an opening to deeper calm. The beauty of Greek mythology lies not only in its action, but also in its atmosphere. When we imagine the gods and heroes of long ago, we also imagine their world. The olive groves shimmering in moonlight, the marble columns standing in solemn silence, the vast sea stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Before the first steps of Jason's journey, there is this setting, a Greece alive with the pulse of divine presence, where stories and reality intermingled seamlessly. As you listen, you are not only hearing a story, you are walking through an ancient dream, one that millions before you have also wandered through. Allow your mind to ease into the journey. Let the names, Jason, Argonauts, Medea, Colchis, wash over you as softly as raindrops. They are not just characters but echoes of an age when myth explained the unknown, when people believed that every star in the sky was a god's watchful eye and every rustle of wind carried a divine whisper. Tonight, they will not ask you to follow every detail or grasp every moment. They will simply drift across your imagination like passing clouds, leaving behind traces of wonder. As this introduction draws you into stillness, feel the rhythm of your own breath. Inhale as the ship's sails fill with wind. Exhale as the waves retreat to the sea. With each cycle, you are already stepping into Jason's world, a place where mortals challenged fate, where prophecies shaped lives, and where distant lands held treasures both radiant and perilous. You may picture yourself among the Argonauts, or simply as a quiet presence on the Argo, content to watch and listen. The choice is yours, and both will carry you gently toward rest. This is not only a story, but a companion for the night. Whether you stay awake to hear each trial and triumph, or whether you drift softly into dreams before Jason even leaves the shore, the myth will hold you. It has held countless others through centuries, from listeners in ancient Greece to you, here, tonight. The adventure lies ahead, but for now, it is enough to rest on the threshold, to sense the promise of a tale waiting to unfold. As the sails rise, as the oars dip into calm waters, you are already part of the journey. And so, the story begins, slowly, gently, like the first light of dawn touching the horizon. Jason's tale is not only of quests and dangers, but of the human spirit, of hope against despair, of destiny unfolding one quiet step at a time. Tonight, let it unfold around you, not as a demand for attention, but as a lullaby carried by ancient voices. You are safe, you are at rest, and the sea of myth carries you onward. Long before Jason ever set foot upon the deck of the Argo, there was the world into which he was born, a Greece steeped in stories, where every tree, every river, every mountain seemed alive with spirit and meaning. To understand his journey, it helps to close your eyes and drift into that world, a place not quite history, not quite fantasy, but something that has always existed in between. Imagine the glow of an ancient fire, its light flickering across stone walls, as elders told tales that explained the mysteries of life. Their voices rose and fell like waves, carrying with them the grandeur of gods, the warnings of fate, and the delicate threads that bound mortals to the divine. This is the world that gave rise to Jason's legend, a world where myth was not just a story but the very breath of existence. In this Greece of long ago, the gods were not distant beings. They walked among mortals, intervened in their struggles, and shaped their destinies. To speak of Jason's story is also to speak of Zeus, the king of the gods, whose thunderbolts illuminated the heavens. It is to recall Hero, protective yet vengeful, guiding some heroes while cursing others. It is to hear whispers of Athena, goddess of wisdom, who would one day bless the ship Argo itself. The gods were as unpredictable as the sea, their moods shifting from kindness to fury without warning. And in this balance of favor and wrath, every hero's fate was suspended. Yet the land itself was equally alive. Greece was a patchwork of mountains, valleys, and coasts, each carrying its own mythic presence. The high peaks, where storms gathered, were imagined as the thrones of gods. The rivers, glittering in sunlight, were seen as sacred paths where naiads and spirits lingered. Even the olive groves swayed not only with the wind, but with the breath of the divine. To live in such a land was to never be alone. Every sound of leaves, every ripple in water, was a reminder of stories waiting to be told. Among the mortals, tales of heroes were more than entertainment. They were lessons, reflections of how to live, how to endure, and how to hope. The people of ancient Greece looked to stories of voyages and trials as mirrors of their own lives. Just as Jason would one day set sail for distant shores, so too did countless farmers, sailors, and travelers face their own smaller but no less important journeys. Myth transformed their struggles into something larger, into a part of the eternal fabric of the universe. Picture a quiet village by the sea, its huts made of stone and clay, smoke rising gently from the evening fires. Families gather at twilight, children leaning forward with wide eyes, as an elder begins to speak. His voice is slow and measured, designed not only to entertain but to soothe the mind and ease the heart. He tells of heroes who faced monsters, of men and women who challenged fate, of journeys across oceans to lands unknown. These myths were not simply faraway fantasies. They were bridges connecting ordinary lives with extraordinary meaning. The story of Jason belongs to this tradition. It is part of a cycle of myths that carried the people of Greece into realms beyond their daily toil. Just as they gazed up at the stars, wondering about the mysteries of the cosmos, so too did they listen to tales of the Golden Fleece and dream of what lay beyond the horizon. The constellations themselves were believed to be heroes and creatures immortalized in the sky, so that even when the fire went out and the night grew quiet, the myths still shimmered overhead, eternal and watchful. And so, when we speak of Jason, we are not only recounting his adventures, we are stepping into an ancient way of seeing the world, one that blazed the line between mortal and divine. In that Greece, destiny was not simply a matter of choice but of prophecy, of signs and omens that revealed the will of higher powers. A single sandal could mark the fulfillment of fate, and a whispered word from a seer could alter the course of kings. To tell Jason's story is to move within this web of fate, to walk slowly and gently through a land where everything, stars, storms, voices, and dreams, was alive with meaning. Let your mind linger there for a while. See the temples rising above hillsides, their columns gleaming in the sunlight. Hear the chants of priests and the quiet prayers of those who sought guidance from the gods. Imagine the scent of olive oil lamps burning softly in the twilight. In such a world, Myth was not distant. It was as close as the breath in your chest, as familiar as the ground beneath your feet. This is the world of ancient Greece, and it is here that Jason's life unfolds. A land of prophecies, of heroic ideals, of gods who shaped the fates of men, and of people who found comfort and wonder in their stories. To fall into this myth is to fall into a place where every moment is touched by eternity. And as you listen, you too are walking softly through that same landscape, carried by the timeless rhythm of the tale. Jason's story begins, as so many Greek myths do, with a prophecy. In the world of the ancients, prophecy was not a vague suggestion or a hopeful vision of the future. It was fate itself, spoken aloud. No matter what steps were taken to avoid it, no matter how carefully one tried to steer away, prophecy had a way of finding its path, like water flowing toward the sea. And so it was with Jason, whose life would be shaped long before he was old enough to hold an or set eyes upon a golden fleece. In the kingdom of Iolcus, located in Thessaly, Jason's father was King Aeson, a rightful ruler beloved by many. Yet peace rarely lasted long in the tales of old. Aeson's half-brother, Peleus, ambitious and restless, seized the throne for himself. Where Aeson sought harmony, Peleus hungered for power. Such shifts in fortune were common in Greek storytelling. The rightful king undone by betrayal, the usurper haunted by fear of the prophecy that must surely follow. Peleus had reason to be fearful, for the oracles soon whispered of his doom. The prophecy spoke clearly. Beware of the man who would one day come to challenge him, a man marked by the sign of a single sandal. This was no ordinary warning, but a riddle of fate. How could such a detail, the loss of one's sandal, mark the rise of a challenger? Yet the gods often spoke in such symbols, wrapping inevitability in curious images, as if to remind mortals that their understanding was always incomplete. Peleus heard this prophecy and, though he tried to continue as king, the shadow of those words clung to him. He knew his power was borrowed time. Meanwhile, Aeson's line continued. Jason was born into this atmosphere of danger, his very existence a threat to Peleus' stolen throne. To protect the infant, Aeson and his wife sought to hide him away, much as other heroes of myth, like Perseus or Oedipus, were hidden from danger in their youth. Jason's early life was marked by secrecy and care, for those who loved him understood that the prophecy hung over him like a star burning in the night. If he survived, he would grow into the figure destined to alter the kingdom's fate. The boy was sent away, entrusted to the care of the wise centaur Chiron, who lived on Mount Pelion. Chiron was unlike other centaurs, who were often wild and untamed. He was a teacher, a healer, a figure of guidance for many of Greece's greatest heroes. Under Chiron's watchful care, Jason grew not only strong in body but calm in spirit. He learned music and medicine, hunting and philosophy, as well as the arts of courage and kindness. Chiron's presence was like a steady river, shaping the boy into the man he would become. The years passed quietly, each one a step toward the prophecy's unfolding. And yet fate does not rest forever. In time, Jason came of age and felt the pull to return to Iolcus, to step into the world that had been denied to him as a child. His heart was not driven only by ambition, but by a sense of justice, an unspoken desire to see his family's line restored. He knew little of Peleus' fear, or the prophecy that still haunted the throne. He returned not as a usurper, but as a young man ready to face the life he believed was his. It was then, on his journey back, that the prophecy revealed itself in the simplest and yet most extraordinary way. Jason came to a river swollen with water, its current too strong for a frail old woman who stood at its edge. She was no ordinary woman, though Jason did not yet know it. She was a goddess hero in disguise, testing the young man's character. Without hesitation, Jason lifted her into his arms to carry her across. The river's force tugged at him, the stones shifted beneath his feet, and in the struggle, he lost one of his sandals. When at last he reached the far shore, the goddess vanished, leaving Jason alone, one sandal gone, unaware that he had just fulfilled the mark of prophecy. Word of this traveled quickly. When Jason arrived at Iolcus, the people saw him, strong, noble, walking with only one sandal, and whispers spread like fire through dry fields. Peleus' heart surely faltered in that moment, for here was the sign he had dreaded, standing before him in flesh and blood. The prophecy had not been avoided. It had arrived, quietly, in the form of a nephew he had sought to suppress. Yet myths unfold slowly, like a dream half-remembered. Jason did not storm the throne or demand his right outright. He was calm, respectful, even gentle in his presence. The usurper, however, knew that the gods had set events in motion. Peleus could not simply kill the boy. That would anger both the people and the divine. Instead, he looked for another way, a cleverer way, to rid himself of the threat. If Jason was destined to challenge him, then let the gods themselves test him. And so Peleus spoke, his voice smooth with cunning, setting Jason on a path that would shape not only his life, but the lives of all who would sail with him. This was the prophecy's power, a single detail, a single sandal, guiding the flow of destiny. Jason, still young and unknowing, stood at the threshold of his adventure. The throne was near. But before he could even think of claiming it, a quest awaited him, one that would carry him across seas, into lands of wonder and danger, and into the embrace of myths that would echo forever. Jason's early years unfolded far from the throne that was his birthright, hidden away from danger and nurtured in quiet seclusion. When his father, Aeson, was stripped of his power by the usurper Peleus, Jason's life hung by a thread. In those times, to be the child of a fallen king was to carry both hope and peril. Hope, because the blood of rulers still flowed in his veins. Peril, because any sign of his survival could be seen as a threat to the man now seated on the throne. And so, just as river currents carry a child far from the storm, Jason was guided into the care of one who could keep him safe, far from the eyes of those who wished him harm. That guardian was Chiron, the wise centaur of Mount Pelion. Unlike the wild and reckless centaurs of myth, Chiron was patient, learned, and deeply kind. His cave high upon the mountain was a place of teaching and healing, and there he raised many of Greece's greatest heroes. It was here, in the stillness of forests and the rhythm of mountain streams, that Jason grew into manhood. Life in Chiron's care was simple and steady, without the politics of a throne or the dangers of a usurper's wrath. Each day carried with it lessons in music and poetry, in medicine and herbs, in the art of hunting, and in the wisdom of patience. From the first light of dawn, Jason's days began in harmony with the land. He would run through the valleys, his bare feet touching the dew-soaked grass, his young voice echoing through the trees. Chiron taught him how to listen to the wind, how to sense the shifting moods of nature, how to find healing roots hidden beneath the soil. These teachings were more than skills. They were a way of life, instilling in Jason a balance between strength and gentleness. While other boys might grow restless or arrogant, Jason learned humility in the presence of mountains, patience in the quiet growth of plants, and respect for the creatures that roamed the earth. But not all of his childhood was study and practice. Evenings on the mountain carried their own kind of magic. Imagine this scene. The sky painted in gold and violet as the sun sank behind the horizon, a fire crackling softly within Chiron's cave. Jason would sit cross-legged, listening to his teacher's voice. Chiron spoke not only of practical skills but of the old stories, the rise of gods, the triumphs of heroes, the warnings woven into myth. These tales flowed into Jason's dreams, blending with the starlight above. In those hours, the boy was not only learning how to survive, but how to see the world through the eyes of those who came before him. As years passed, Jason's body grew strong. His shoulders broadened, his hands became steady, and his eyes carried both determination and warmth. He was not a boy of idle play but of purpose, shaped quietly by the mountain's rhythm. Yet even as he thrived, the shadow of his destiny remained. Though he did not yet know it, the prophecy of Peleus still lingered in the world below. Jason lived in peace, but fate was never far away. There's a gentle sorrow in stories of hidden children, for their lives, though safe, are touched by distance. Jason's father remained in Iolcus, stripped of his throne and forced into silence, while Jason grew under the care of another. Perhaps, at times, he wondered about his family, about the throne that had been lost, about the kingdom that might one day call his name. But the mountain offered comfort, and Chiron's wisdom filled those spaces of longing with patience. When Jason came of age, the years of preparation had shaped him into something greater than a sheltered prince. He had become a man who understood both hardship and harmony, who valued kindness as much as courage. He could heal wounds with herbs as easily as he could strike down a beast in the forest. He could listen as well as he could lead. These qualities, instilled in him from youth, would later win him the loyalty of many and guide him through trials no ordinary man could endure. The moment eventually arrived when Jason felt the pull to leave the mountain. He had lived in safety, in study, in quiet strength, but he knew, as heroes always know, that the world awaited him. To stay forever in Chiron's cave would be to turn from the thread of fate woven for him at birth. And so, he descended from Mount Pelion, not as a boy hidden from danger, but as a young man prepared to step into the flow of destiny. His early life was a quiet chapter, a pause before the storm, a time of growth and shaping. In the stillness of those years, Jason was formed into more than a prince. He became a figure of balance, with one foot in the wisdom of the healer and the other in the courage of the warrior. It was this balance, more than any single skill, that would carry him forward into the greatest quest of his age. And though he could not know it then, the lessons of his childhood, gentleness, patience, humility, would prove as vital as the strength of his arm when the seas grew rough and the trials of the Golden Fleece awaited him. Jason's return to Iolcus was not marked by triumph or fanfare, but by quiet steps and a steady heart. After years of learning, of growing in the care of Chiron on Mount Pelion, he had become a man both strong in body and gentle in spirit. Yet within him burned the sense that he was not meant to remain in the mountains forever. His life carried a weight, a thread that pulled him downward into the plains, toward the kingdom that had once belonged to his father. As he walked the winding paths back into the mortal world, he could not yet see how fate would unfold, but he felt its presence like the steady beat of waves against the shore. The people of Iolcus had lived for years under the rule of Peleus. Though he wore the crown, there were always whispers, quiet conversations in the markets and the fields about how he had taken the throne unlawfully from his brother, Jason's father. In public, Peleus ruled with the sharpness of authority. Yet beneath his command lay a heart heavy with unease. The prophecy that haunted him, the warning that a man with one sandal would bring his downfall, had never left his mind. It was on his journey back that Jason fulfilled this prophecy without even knowing it. At a river crossing swollen with rushing waters, he had carried across an old woman who was struggling to pass. The current was strong, pulling at his body, tugging at his steps. In the struggle, one of his sandals slipped loose and vanished into the river. The woman he carried was no mortal at all, but hero in disguise, testing the kindness and strength of his character. Jason had passed the test, but the mark of prophecy now clung to him, the sign of the man with one sandal. When Jason entered the city of Iolcus, the whispers of the people turned into wide-eyed recognition. Here was a man tall and proud, walking calmly into the heart of the kingdom, and upon his feet was only one sandal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The prophecy, they said, the one has come. And so the news traveled swiftly to the throne room, where Peleus sat uneasily, hearing the footsteps of fate drawing nearer. When Jason stood before him, he did not arrive with anger or demand. Instead, his voice was steady, respectful, and measured. He declared who he was, the son of Aeson, the rightful heir of the throne of Iolcus, and he called upon Peleus to relinquish what had been wrongfully taken. Peleus listened, but inside him, fear was twisting into cunning. He could not kill Jason outright, for the people were already stirred by his presence, and the gods would not look kindly upon such a crime. But perhaps, Peleus thought, there was another way. Perhaps he could rid himself of Jason without staining his hands. Peleus leaned forward, his words smooth and deceptively generous. He told Jason that if he wished to prove himself worthy of rule, he should first perform a noble deed for the kingdom. He spoke of a task, one so daunting that no man could hope to succeed. Far across the seas, In the distant land of Colchis, there lay the Golden Fleece, a prize of divine origin. Hung upon a tree in a sacred grove and guarded by a sleepless dragon, it was a treasure that gleamed with the light of gods themselves. Peleus spoke of the fleece as though it were a gift for the kingdom, a symbol of prosperity, but in truth, he named it knowing full well it was nearly impossible to obtain. Jason listened carefully, and though he understood the danger, he did not waver. His heart stirred with the call of adventure, with the pull of destiny. The quest for the Golden Fleece was no ordinary challenge. It was a trial worthy of heroes, a journey that could shape the songs of generations. Where Peleus hoped to see him undone, Jason saw the chance to fulfill his fate. Without hesitation, he accepted the challenge, promising that he would sail across the seas, confront whatever dangers awaited, and return with the shining fleece. The court watched in silence, some with awe, others with doubt, as Jason spoke these words. Peleus smiled thinly, outwardly supportive, but inwardly he felt a flicker of dread. For in attempting to rid himself of Orpheus' threat, he had perhaps only ensured its path. Jason would gather allies. He would embark on a voyage unlike any before, and his name would soon echo far beyond the walls of Iolcus. That night, Jason stood beneath the stars, their ancient lights scattered across the heavens. The sea, calm and endless, stretched before him, promising trials and wonders alike. Though he could not yet see the faces of those who would join him, the mighty Argonauts, each with their own gifts, he felt the weight of their coming presence. The call to adventure had been spoken, and in answering it, Jason had taken his first step into legend. In myths, there is always a moment when the ordinary life is left behind, when the hero accepts the path laid before him. For Jason, this was that moment. He no longer belonged only to himself or to the quiet safety of a mountain. He belonged to the journey, to the story, to the rhythm of fate itself. And as he prepared to sail into the unknown, the world seemed to pause, as though even the gods leaned closer to watch what would unfold. The challenge had been declared, and Jason, resolute in his promise, now faced the question of how he would ever cross the seas to reach Colchis and return with the Golden Fleece. A single man could not hope to face such dangers alone. The task was greater than any mortal had yet undertaken, and so it was clear to Jason that he would need a company of the bravest and most skilled men in all of Greece. Thus began the great gathering of heroes, a calling that would bring together the finest warriors, hunters, sailors, and demigods of their age. This company, destined to be remembered in story and song, would be known as the Argonauts. The very first step was the ship. To attempt such a journey without a vessel worthy of the seas would have been foolish. Jason sought out Argus, a master shipwright known for his craft and devotion to the gods. Argus, with steady hands and knowledge passed down through generations, set about constructing a ship unlike any that had been built before. With timber cut from the sacred forests of Dodona, where the voice of Zeus himself whispered through the oaks, the ship took form. It was named the Argo, in honor of its builder, and upon its prow was set a piece of wood cut from those holy trees. This enchanted timber held within it the power of prophecy, a voice that could guide and warn the crew in times of peril. Thus, the Argo itself became more than a vessel. It was a companion, alive with divine presence. News of Jason's quest spread quickly across Greece, carried by word of mouth, by song, by the very excitement of destiny unfolding. One by one, great figures began to step forward, offering their strength to the journey. Some came for glory, some for friendship, and others because they, too, felt the pull of fate. Among the first to join was Hercules, son of Zeus, whose strength was known in every corner of the land. Wherever he walked, men spoke of his labors, his victories over beasts and tyrants alike. For Jason, having Hercules as an ally was like having a living mountain on his side, a shield against any mortal threat. Alongside him came Hylas, the beautiful youth who was devoted to him, inseparable from his side. Orpheus, too, was drawn to the Argo, not with sword or spear, but with the power of his music. His lyre could calm storms, soften the hearts of beasts, and even charm the very stones. He would prove as vital as any warrior, for not all dangers on the seas could be met with brute strength alone. Then came the Dioscuri, the twin brothers Castor and Polydeuces, born of Leda. Castor was famed for his mastery of horses, while Polydeuces, with fists quick as lightning, was unmatched in the art of boxing. Their bond as brothers brought balance and courage, a reminder that unity was as essential as strength. Atalanta, swift-footed and fierce, came as well, the lone woman among the Argonauts. Many doubted her place, for the world of heroes was often closed to women, but her skill as a huntress and her speed, unmatched by any man, silenced those doubts. She came not for approval, but for the challenge, the thrill of adventure that burned within her. Idas and Lynceus, brothers of great repute, joined, too. Idas bold and fiery, Lynceus gifted with the sharpest eyes in all of Greece, said to see through even the depths of the earth. There was also Meleager, a warrior of noble spirit, and Zetes and Calais, winged sons of Boreas, who could ride the winds themselves. So many others gathered. Argus, the shipwright himself, joined the crew. Euphemus, who could run across the sea without sinking. Ancaeus, a skilled helmsman, and countless more, each bearing unique talents and strengths. This was not merely an army, but a constellation of heroes, each a star in their own right. When at last the Argo was complete, gleaming with the polish of Argus' skill and shining with divine favor, the heroes assembled upon the shore. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the world knew something great was about to begin. Jason stood before them, no longer a lone figure with a promise, but a leader entrusted with the hopes and lives of the greatest company of men and women ever gathered. He spoke words of unity, of courage, of the trials ahead. His voice was calm yet firm, weaving through their hearts like the steady rhythm of a tide. The Argonauts stepped aboard the ship, one by one, their feet touching the deck that would carry them across uncharted waters. The prow creaked softly, the sacred wood whispering faintly with prophetic tones. The gods themselves seemed to watch, each perhaps with their own stake in what was to come. It was a beginning unlike any other. Never before had such a host set sail together, bound not by conquest but by a single quest of mythic scale. As the oars touched the sea for the first time, the water rippled outward, carrying their fate into the vast unknown. And so the Argo was born not only as a ship but as a legend, and those who sailed upon her would be remembered for as long as stories were told. For though each hero came with his or her own reasons, together they had become something greater. The Argonauts, united by Jason's call and bound for the land of Colchis, where destiny awaited in the shadow of the Golden Fleece. The journey had not yet begun, but already the story had grown into something that stirred the hearts of mortals and gods alike. For the seas ahead held danger, wonder, and trials beyond measure. But in this moment, there was only the quiet pride of heroes standing together on the edge of legend. The day of departure arrived at last, and the Argo, shining with new timber and divine blessing, rested gently against the waters. The heroes had gathered, their armor gleaming in the early light, yet the mood was not of battle but of solemn anticipation. For though their spirits were stirred by the promise of adventure, they also understood that to sail into the unknown was no small thing. It was not only the strength of their arms that would be tested, but also their hearts, the unity, and the favor of the gods themselves. Jason stood before them, quiet but steady, looking upon the companions who had come to answer the call. He felt the weight of his promise pressing upon him. This was not merely a voyage for glory. It was a journey that had sprung from his vow to reclaim honor for his family and his land. Each hero gathered there had their own reasons, but in this moment, Jason carried them all upon his shoulders as leader. He lifted his hands and offered a prayer, his voice soft but strong, calling for guidance, for protection, and for courage. The gods, ever watchful, did not ignore this prayer. Hera, who had tested Jason at the river and found him kind, kept her gaze upon him with favor. She whispered to the winds to guard his sails and spoke to the seas to hold their fury, at least for the beginning of the voyage. Athena, patron of wisdom and craft, had already guided the hands of Argus in the building of the ship, and now she blessed the Argo itself, steadying its frame, so that it would endure storms yet to come. The people of Iolcus gathered upon the shore, their voices quiet, their eyes full of awe. They had lived too long under the rule of Peleus, and in Jason they saw not only a hero but also a glimmer of hope. Some brought offerings of food and wine, laying them before the gods for the safe passage of the heroes. Others simply watched, knowing they were witnessing the birth of a tale that would outlive them all. Orpheus stepped forward, lyre in hand, his presence calm and graceful. He plucked at the strings, and the sound flowed out like water, filling the air with harmony. The song he played was not of triumph but of beginnings, of courage woven with gentleness, of paths unfolding like rivers into the sea. The heroes listened, and their hearts grew lighter, steadier, as if the music itself carried them toward their fate. Even the waves lapped more gently at the shore, as though the sea itself had paused to listen. Before they departed, sacrifices were made. A bull was offered to Poseidon, lord of the seas, that he might grant them safe passage and favor their oars. To Zeus, they gave libations of wine, calling upon his justice to oversee their quest. Incense was burned to Hera and Athena, their smoke rising into the morning air like threads of prayer climbing toward the heavens. Each god was honored, each petition made with reverence, for the Argonauts knew well that no mortal strength alone could carry them through what lay ahead. At last, when all was ready, the heroes boarded the Argo one by one. The oars were taken up, the ropes untied, and the ship began to drift from the shore. As it moved, the sacred timber of the prow gave a low murmur, the voice of Zeus's oak speaking softly, a sound only the crew could hear. It was a blessing, a whisper of destiny, and though its words were faint, they brought courage to the hearts of the Argonauts. The people upon the shore raised their voices in farewell. Mothers called to sons, brothers to brothers, lovers to beloveds, each voice threading into the air, carried by the breeze as the ship glided into deeper waters. Jason looked back once, his heart swelling with the weight of both duty and hope, then turned his eyes to the horizon, where the sea stretched endlessly before him. The Argo moved forward, its 50 oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, cutting the water with a sound like the beating of a great heart. Above them, the sails caught the wind, pulling them onward. The heroes sat in quiet unity, some watching the waves, some lost in thought, all bound together by the same purpose. Thus began their voyage, not with fanfare or thunder, but with calm strength, with music, with prayer, and with the blessings of gods and mortals alike. The world behind them grew smaller, the world ahead larger, and though none could yet know the trials they would face, in that moment they felt a harmony between themselves, the sea, and the divine. It was a beginning worthy of heroes, a departure remembered not for noise but for peace. And so the Argo left the safety of the shore, carrying with it not just Jason and his companions, but the hopes of an entire land, and the gaze of gods who leaned close to see what the mortal heart, bound with courage and fellowship, might achieve. The Argo had slipped free from the land, and the heroes now found themselves carried by the rhythm of the sea. At first, the waters were calm, the waves gentle as if Poseidon himself wished to watch their beginnings without interference. The oars dipped in unison, each stroke steady, each movement echoing with purpose. The heroes adjusted to their new life aboard the ship, the creak of the timbers beneath them, the salt of the air upon their lips, and the endless horizon stretching out like an untold story. Yet every sailor knew that the sea is never without its tests, and so the first trials began to rise, shaping their fellowship and their courage. The earliest challenge was not of monsters or storms, but of hunger and fatigue. Days at sea blurred together, and the endless rocking of the ship tested even the strongest of men. Some found themselves seasick, their bodies not yet accustomed to the rolling waves. Others grew restless, their warrior spirits untested, eager for action yet bound by the slow passage of water. It was here that Orpheus, with his lyre, proved vital. At dusk, when weariness pressed upon them, he would strum his strings and weave songs of comfort. His melodies spoke of home, of warm fields, of stars guiding travelers. The music eased the hearts of the Argonauts, reminding them that even in the silence of the sea, they were not alone. The first true test came when the Argo reached the island of Lemnos. Here lived women alone, for the men of the island had been struck down by divine wrath, leaving only their wives and daughters behind. The women, ruled by Queen Hypsipyle, at first feared the sight of the approaching ship, but soon curiosity drew them to the shore. Jason and his companions were welcomed warmly, with feasts and laughter, and for a time, it seemed the heroes might linger. The women, lonely and yearning for companionship, tempted the Argonauts to remain with them. Some of the crew, weary of the sea already, felt the pull of comfort and ease. But Jason remembered the vow he had made, the promise to bring back the Golden Fleece. With gentle words, he reminded his companions that their journey was greater than any rest could offer. They could not allow themselves to be lulled into forgetting their purpose. With respect to Queen Hypsipyle and gratitude for her kindness, Jason led his men back to the Argo, and once more they set sail. This was their first lesson, that temptation could be as dangerous as any storm, and that a hero must remember his path even when comfort calls. No sooner had they left Lemnos than they faced a fiercer challenge. The sea began to swell, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind rose, lashing the sails, and the wave crashed hard against the sides of the Argo. The heroes bent to their oars, their muscles straining as they fought to keep the ship steady. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder of Zeus himself echoed across the waters. It was a storm like none had yet seen, and for a moment it seemed the Argo might be swallowed whole by the raging sea. But in that moment of fear, the prow of the ship spoke. The sacred timber from Dodona, cut from Zeus's own oracle tree, gave a low, steady voice that could be heard even above the roaring waves. It urged them to hold fast, to trust the strength of their arms and the wisdom of their helmsmen. Encouraged, they rowed harder, every man pulling in unison, their strokes driving against the fury of the storm. Athena's blessing held the ship together, and with Poseidon's will tempered by Hera's favor, the Argo endured. When the storm finally broke and the sea grew calm once more, the heroes were left exhausted but alive, bound together more tightly by the trial they had survived. After the storm, their course brought them to another land, the Isle of the Dolions. Here, they were greeted by King Cyzicus, who welcomed them with open arms. The Argonauts shared feasts with the Dolions, exchanging gifts and tales, their spirits renewed by such kindness. Yet fate is never simple. As they left the island, the night grew dark, and in the confusion of the stormy sea, they were driven back again to the very same shores. The Dolions, mistaking them for raiders in the darkness, took up arms. A tragic battle followed, Argonaut against Dolion, neither realizing whom they fought. When dawn came and the truth was revealed, grief weighed heavily upon them. King Cyzicus himself had been struck down, and the Argonauts mourned for the friend they had lost by cruel mischance. Jason led his companions in funeral rites, honoring the fallen king with offerings and prayers. This trial, unlike the storm, could not be overcome by strength of arm but only by humility and sorrow. It reminded them that not all dangers on their path would come from monsters or gods. Sometimes fate's cruelty was sharper than any blade. They left the Dolions with heavy hearts, the lesson carved deep within them, that even the purest intentions could not always guard against tragedy. As the Argo pushed onward, each hero grew quieter, more thoughtful. Their journey had already tested them with temptation, with fury, and with grief, and they had endured. Ahead lay greater dangers still, strange islands, hostile kings, beasts born of chaos, and challenges set by the gods themselves. Yet the bond of the Argonauts, tested by sea and sorrow, was beginning to harden like tempered steel. The sea, ever restless, whispered its own warnings in the crash of waves and the sigh of wind. The Argonauts rowed steadily onward, their eyes upon the horizon, their hearts steady with the knowledge that the quest had only just begun. The early trials had shaped them, weaving them more closely into one another's fates, and though they had lost as much as they had gained, they continued, heroes stepping into the deeper waters of legend. The Argo pressed forward, Its oars cutting steadily through the waters as the company of heroes grew accustomed to the rhythm of the voyage. The trials they had already endured, the temptations of Lemnos, the storm's fury, and the sorrow at the Isle of the Dolions, had tempered their spirits. Yet the sea was vast, and each horizon seemed to hold a new test of strength, patience, or faith. It was during this stage of the journey that the Argonauts came upon one of the most unusual and sorrowful figures in their voyage, King Phineus of Thrace. Phineus was once a man blessed with the gift of prophecy, able to see far into the designs of the gods and glimpse what was yet to come. But such gifts are heavy burdens. In his eagerness to help mankind, Phineus revealed too much of what he had seen, speaking truth the gods had not wished mortals to know. For this transgression, Zeus struck him with a terrible punishment. His eyes were blinded, leaving him in darkness, and though he remained king, he lived in torment. His punishment was crueler still. Whenever food was placed before him, monstrous creatures called the Harpies descended from the sky. These winged beings, half bird and half woman, would snatch away the meal, devour it greedily, or foul it so that it could not be eaten. Thus Phineus, though surrounded by abundance, lived in a state of endless hunger and misery. When the Argonauts arrived at his shores, they found Phineus frail and weary, his body wasted by starvation. Yet even in his weakness, he welcomed them, sensing their noble purpose. He spoke to Jason and his companions of his suffering, of how the Harpies had plagued him without mercy. His voice was filled not with bitterness but with the resignation of a man who had suffered too long. The heroes, moved by pity and justice, vowed to help him. Among the Argonauts were the Boreads, Calais, and Zetes, the winged sons of Boreas, the north wind. Their swiftness was unmatched, and they alone could hope to pursue the Harpies. They prepared themselves, while the others laid out food before Phineus's bait. No sooner had the blind king reached toward the meal than the air was split with a screeching cry. From above descended the Harpies, their wings beating the air with fury, their claws outstretched to seize the food. Their forms were grotesque, both fearsome and sorrowful, as if they embodied torment itself. But this time, they were met not with helplessness but with resistance. Calais and Zetes leapt into the air, their wings carrying them swiftly after the creatures. The chase carried across the sea and into the skies, the Boreads pursuing the Harpies with unyielding determination. The Harpies screamed and twisted, trying to escape, but the sons of Boreas were relentless. At last, the gods themselves intervened. Iris, the rainbow messenger, appeared and commanded the Boreads to spare the creatures. The Harpies would no longer torment Phineus, but their lives were to be spared as servants of divine will. When Calais and Zetes returned, victorious yet merciful, Phineus wept with gratitude. For the first time in many years, he was able to eat without fear, to taste the simple joy of bread and meat. His suffering, though not his blindness, had ended, and he blessed the Argonauts for their compassion and courage. In return for their kindness, Phineus offered them what aid he could. Though his sight was gone, his prophetic gift remained, and he could still glimpse the dangers that lay ahead. He warned them of the simple gates, the clashing rocks that guarded the passage to the Black Sea. These twin cliffs, enchanted and terrible, would crash together whenever a ship attempted to pass, crushing wooden sailor alike into splinters. Countless voyagers had perished there, and without guidance, the Argonauts too would surely meet their doom. Phineus instructed them to release a dove before attempting the passage. If the bird could pass safely, they would know the timing of the rocks and might slip through in its wake. But if the dove was caught and destroyed, they would know their fate was sealed. He gave this counsel solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of both warning and hope. The Argonauts listened with reverence, understanding that this prophecy might be the difference between survival and ruin. They offered Phineus gifts in gratitude, but he asked for nothing more than the peace they had already granted him. With prayers and blessings exchanged, they boarded the Argo once more, carrying with them both the memory of the tormented king and the vital knowledge he had shared. As the ship pulled away from the Thracian shore, the Argonauts sat quietly, their minds heavy with thought. The image of Phineus, frail, blind, yet still touched by the divine, remained with them. He had shown them that suffering could be borne with dignity, that even in punishment, wisdom might yet shine through. But his warning of the Symplegades was no less haunting, a shadow looming over their path. The sea ahead was calm for the moment, but all aboard the Argo felt the tension of what awaited. They had survived temptation, storms, and sorrow, and they had now faced the monstrous harpies. But the test that lay before them, the trial of the clashing rocks, would be unlike any they had yet endured. For this was not simply a battle of strength or endurance, but a trial of timing, faith, and the will of the gods themselves. And so the Argo sailed on, her oars steady, her crew united, carrying with them the prophecy of Phineus and the weight of a challenge that would test not only their bodies but the very thread of their fate. The warning of Phineus echoed in their minds long after the Argo had left his shores. The blind prophet's voice, calm yet edged with the weight of destiny, had told them of the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, guardians of the narrow strait that led into the Black Sea. None who had attempted to pass them before had survived. Ships were splintered into fragments, men lost to the crushing force of stone. It was a terror whispered among sailors, a natural boundary that few dared to approach. Yet for Jason and the Argonauts, there was no turning back. The Golden Fleece lay beyond, in Colchis, and to reach it, they would have to face the gates of stone. The day grew heavy as they approached the waters where the Symplegades loomed. The sea seemed to still, as if holding its breath, and the air itself carried a weight, thick with dread. The cliffs could not yet be seen, but already the sound of them reached the ears of the Argonauts, a low, distant thunder, the grinding of stone against stone, echoing like the heartbeat of the earth. The men grew quiet. Even the bravest among them felt unease at the thought of their fragile ship pitted against the might of mountains. Jason gathered his companions on deck. His voice was steady, though he too felt the tremor of fear. He reminded them of Phineus's counsel, of the dove that must be released to test the passage. The heroes listened, their faces set with grim determination. They knew that this was not a trial of sword or spear, but of timing, unity, and faith in both the gods and their leader. At last, the cliffs came into view, towering on either side of the narrow channel. The Symplegades were immense, their jagged edges sharp and cruel. At irregular intervals, they would heave and shudder, crashing together with a roar that shook the air and sent spray flying high into the sky. The sight of it was enough to chill the blood. Each impact was like the strike of thunder, and each time they closed, the sea foamed white with the violence of their collision. Then they would drift apart, leaving a brief, treacherous opening before slamming together once more. The heroes gathered at the prow, eyes fixed on the deadly passage. Jason reached into the cage where they had kept the dove, a small bird with white feathers gleaming in the dim light. Its wings fluttered nervously, as though it too sensed the peril ahead. With a silent prayer to Zeus, Jason released it. The dove shot forward, wings beating furiously as it darted into the gap between the cliffs. All eyes followed its flight. The rocks began to move, groaning as they drew together with irresistible force. The bird flew faster, faster still, and just as the cliffs clashed shut, it slipped through, though the tips of its tail feathers were caught and clipped. The Argonauts gasped, relief flooding through them. The message was clear. Passage was possible, but only by the narrowest of margins. Jason did not hesitate. With calm command, he called to his companions to man the oars. Hercules, Orpheus, Atalanta, and all the others bent forward, the muscles taut, every sinew straining as they pulled in perfect unison. The Argo surged forward, her prow aimed at the gap between the Symplegades. The cliffs loomed on either side, their shadows darkening the water, their grinding noise deafening. "Row!" Jason cried, his voice cutting through the thunder. The heroes obeyed, their oars biting deep into the water, pulling the Argo forward with all the strength they possessed. The cliffs began to move again, sliding inward. The opening narrowed. Spray crashed against the sides of the ship. The enchanted timber at the prow groaned and spoke in its low, prophetic voice, urging them on, warning them not to falter. The Argonauts rowed harder, sweat pouring from their brows, arms burning with the effort. The gap was closing, the rocks trembling as they prepared to strike. With a final cry, Jason commanded one last stroke, and the Argo shot forward like an arrow loose from a bow. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. The cliffs shuddered, the sea boiled, and then, just as the rocks came crashing together with a sound like the breaking of the world, the Argo slipped through. The stern of the ship was grazed, splinters flying as the very edge of the rocks caught the wood. But the vessel held. The Argo was through. Behind them, the simple gades groaned once more. But this time they did not close so swiftly. The gods, satisfied with the Argonauts' courage, decreed that the cliff should remain fixed forevermore. From that day onward, the passage into the Black Sea was open, no longer a death trap for sailors. The Argonauts had not only survived, they had transformed the world for all who would follow. On deck, the crew slumped in exhaustion, their chests heaving, arms trembling from the effort. Yet their hearts were alight with triumph. They had faced the greatest danger yet, not of monster or man but of nature itself, and they had endured. Jason stood tall among them, his gaze lifted to the horizon. Ahead lay Colchis, and the trials yet to come. But for now, they had won a victory that would echo through time. Orpheus lifted his lyre and played a gentle song, his music weaving through the salty air, soothing the weariness of the men. The oars rested, the sea calmed, and for a time, peace returned to the Argo. They had crossed the threshold into the unknown, the barrier that had kept others from reaching their goal. In that moment, the Argonauts were not merely a company of heroes. They were a brotherhood, tempered by trial, bound together by the shared knowledge that they had achieved what no others had dared. The sea stretched wide and open before them, promising both wonder and peril. Yet with the memory of the simple gades behind them, they knew that nothing, whether rock, storm, or monster, could easily shake their resolve again. And so, with steady hearts and eyes fixed forward, the Argo sailed on into the deeper mysteries of the Black Sea, carrying Jason and his companions ever closer to the shining prize of the Golden Fleece. The sea beyond the simple gades opened like a vast and secret world, wide and deep, filled with both promise and danger. The Argo glided forward, her oars rising and falling in rhythm, her sail catching the winds that carried them ever eastward. The men, though weary from their ordeal, held their spirits high. Each new mile brought them closer to the fabled land of Colchis, where the Golden Fleece hung in a sacred grove guarded by powers both mortal and divine. For days they traveled along the unfamiliar coasts of the Black Sea. The waters were darker, the winds heavier, and the stars above seemed different, more distant somehow. Tales of strange peoples and uncanny creatures drifted among the crew as they passed desolate shores and forested mountains that rose straight from the waves. At night, when the men lay resting, Orpheus's songs calmed their minds, but always Jason's thoughts returned to one thing: the meeting with King Eats, the man who possessed the prize. At last, as dawn lifted its golden light across the horizon, they sighted the coast of Colchis. The land appeared lush and green, yet wild and untamed, with thick woods stretching inland and rivers winding like silver threads through the valleys. Rising above it all was the city of Aea, the seat of King Eats. White walls gleamed faintly in the morning sun, and towers rose like sentinels, watching the sea. The Argonauts gazed at it in silence, each of them feeling the weight of the journey that had led to this point. Jason gathered his companions. His voice was calm, though his eyes betrayed the tension he carried. "This is the land of our quest," he said, "and within these walls lies the fleece. But Eats is not a king to be swayed by mere words. He is cunning and proud, the son of Alios himself, and he guards his treasure with zeal. We must approach with care, with respect, and with courage." The Argo entered the river Phasis, the waters leading them inland toward the city. The people of Colchis lined the banks, gazing in wonder at the foreign ship and the band of heroes who manned it. Word spread quickly of their arrival, and by the time they reached the harbor of Ea, the king himself had been told of the strangers who sought an audience. Jason, accompanied by the noblest of his companions, Hercules, Castor, Polydeuces, Orpheus, and others, stepped onto the stone quay. The people whispered among themselves, some curious, some suspicious. They were led through the streets of the city, past temples and palaces adorned with golden carvings, until they reached the throne room of Eats. The king sat in majesty, a tall figure with piercing eyes and a beard streaked with fiery red gold. His robes shimmered as though woven with threads of sunlight, for he was the son of the sun god, and his bearing carried the weight of divine blood. At his side stood his daughter Medea, a priestess of Hecate, whose gaze lingered on Jason with quiet intensity. Few noticed her then, but her presence would prove as important as the king's decree. Jason bowed with courtesy, speaking with the careful grace of a man who knew that his words were as important as his sword. He told of their journey, of their trials across Greece, Thrace, and the Black Sea, and of their quest for the Golden Fleece. He did not demand it, but rather petitioned the king with humility, asking for the fleece as a boon to restore honor to his house and bring justice to Iolcus. Eats listened, his expression unreadable. At last, he rose from his throne, his voice deep and commanding. "The Golden Fleece," he said, "is no trinket for travelers or prize for fortune seekers. It is sacred, a symbol of kingship and divine favor, guarded under my care. Do you think I would hand it over to strangers who come unbidden to my shores? No, but," and here he paused, his eyes narrowing, "if you are truly heroes, worthy of such a prize, then you shall earn it. I will give you the fleece, but only if you can complete the trials I set before you." The whole grew silent. The Argonauts shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of the challenge to come. Eats's gaze fell upon Jason, testing his resolve. The king's words were less an offer than a trap, for he was known to devise tasks that no mortal could complete. Jason's heart beat fast, but he did not waver. Bowing once more, he said, "I will accept your challenge, O king, and by the gods' favor, I shall prove myself worthy." At this, Eats's stern mouth curved into a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Very well," he declared. "Tomorrow, you shall face the first of your tasks, and then we will see if you are truly a man of destiny, or merely another fool who dares reach beyond his grasp." The Argonauts were led out of the hall, the murmurs of the Colchians following them like a tide. Night fell over Aea, but sleep did not come easily. Each man wondered what trials the morning would bring. Yet in the quiet shadows, unseen by the others, Medea's eyes lingered once more on Jason. Something stirred within her, a spark of compassion, or perhaps of fate itself. Though no one knew it then, her role in what was to come would be as crucial as Jason's own courage. The stage was set, the prize within reach, yet guarded by impossible demands. The next dawn would bring not rest but trial, and with it, the true testing of Jason's worthiness.
The dawn broke softly over Colchis, the light spilling like molten gold across the palace walls and the river that wound through the city. For Jason and the Argonauts, this sunrise carried a weight unlike any other. The day had come when King Eats would set forth his challenges, tasks designed to break the spirit of any mortal man who dared to covet the Golden Fleece. The city stirred with anticipation, for the Colchians loved to see strangers tested, especially under the cruel cunning of their king. Yet in the Argonauts' camp, the mood was hushed and grave, the men knowing that Jason would soon be asked to achieve the impossible. When they were summoned to the great courtyard before the palace, a crowd had already gathered. The people pressed close, eager to witness the spectacle, their voices rising in a low murmur as Jason and his companions stepped forward. At the far end of the court, Eats sat upon a throne of carved stone, flanked by guards whose spears gleamed in the morning sun. Beside him stood Medea, her expression unreadable, though her eyes flickered toward Jason with a quiet intensity that none around her seemed to notice. Eats raised his hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. His voice, when it rang out, carried the authority of one who was both king and son of a god. "You have come to Colchis, strangers, to claim the fleece of gold. I will not deny you the chance to prove your worth. Yet such a treasure is not won by mere words or the boasting of men. You shall earn it through deeds. If you succeed, the fleece shall be yours. If you fail, your fate shall be your own." He then described the first trial. Beyond the fields of Aea grazed a pair of oxen unlike any known to man, massive creatures with bronze hooves that struck sparks upon the earth, and breath like fire that roared from their nostrils. These bulls, the gift of Hephaestus, could not be subdued by force or trickery, and none but the king himself had ever yoked them. Jason was commanded to drive them into the fields, harness them to a plow, and till the soil with their burning strength. Only then, Eats declared, would he be granted the second part of his task. The crowd whispered in awe, for the bulls were a terror even to the Colchians themselves. Jason, however, did not falter. Though his heart pounded within him, he bowed his head in acceptance. The Argonauts, standing behind him, exchanged uneasy glances, for they knew this was no task for a mortal man. The second task was revealed once the plowing was done. Into the furrows Jason carved with the fire-breathing oxen. Eats commanded him to sow the teeth of a dragon. These teeth were enchanted, imbued with the power of the earth and war itself. From the soil where they were planted, armed warriors would spring forth, men born fully grown, clad in armor, with spears and shields in their hands. These earthborn soldiers would rise without mercy, attacking the sower as an enemy. Jason was expected to withstand this onslaught and prevail, though even the bravest of heroes might falter against such an endless tide. The Colchians cheered at the king's decree, certain that no foreigner could endure these labors. To them, it was merely a matter of time before Jason and his companions were driven from their land, or slain outright in the attempt. Yet even as the king spoke, a subtle shift occurred. Medea's gaze met Jason's once more, and in that fleeting moment, the spark that had stirred within her the night before burned brighter. Something in the stranger's courage, or perhaps in the will of the gods, bound her fate to his. Though she said nothing, in her heart she resolved that Jason would not face these trials alone. That night, as the Argonauts gathered in their camp outside the city, the weight of the king's words pressed heavily upon them. Many despaired, for how could any man yoke fire-breathing bulls or survive an army born from dragon's teeth? Even Hercules, strong as he was, shook his head and admitted that brute force alone would not suffice. But Jason, though troubled, held to hope. He had seen the way Medea's eyes lingered on him, and some instinct told him that his fate was now entwined with hers. In the shadows of the temple of Hecate, Medea wrestled with her heart. She was torn between loyalty to her father and the stirring compassion she felt for the foreign hero who had come so far. Her prayers to the goddess filled the night air, and in her dreams she saw omens of fire and blood, but also of triumph, should she choose to intervene. The goddess's whispers did not condemn her, nor did they forbid her aid. At dawn, she would decide. As sleep fell over the Argonauts, Orpheus plucked at his lyre, his melodies soft and sorrowful, lulling his companions into uneasy rest. The ship lay quiet at anchor, the city hushed, but in every heart there was a restless tension, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Tomorrow, Jason would face the first of each trials, and the fate of their quest would hang in the balance. The impossible had been set before them, and yet within that impossibility flickered the faintest promise that with courage, wit, and perhaps the aid of one who had yet to choose her path, the Argonauts might yet carve their way to the prize that drew them ever onward, the shining Golden Fleece. Night had deepened over Colchis, the moon riding high in the heavens, silvering the river and casting long shadows across the palace walls. The people of the city slept, content that their king's impossible challenge would bring ruin to the foreigners who had dared to seek the Golden Fleece. Yet within the quiet corridors of the palace, Medea lay restless, her heart torn by forces far greater than mere loyalty to blood or crown. She was a daughter of Eats, a priestess of Hecate, trained in the mysteries of herbs and spells, sworn to serve her father's will. But she was also a woman, and her heart stirred in ways she had never known before. Since the moment her eyes had fallen on Jason, something within her had shifted. His courage, his quiet dignity, and the fate that seemed to cling to him like a second skin drew her in. That night, she wandered the temple gardens, her thoughts tangled with doubt. She prayed softly to Hecate, the goddess who guided her craft, and asked for a sign. The night wind carried the faint cry of an owl, an omen of the goddess herself. To Medea, it was as though the goddess whispered not command, but permission, the freedom to act, to shape destiny according to her own will. As the Argonauts lay in uneasy sleep by the riverbank, Jason himself could not rest. He rose from his blanket and walked alone under the stars, his mind troubled by the tasks awaiting him. Fire-breathing bulls, dragon's teeth warriors, such things were fit for gods, not men. Yet he could not falter. Too much had been endured to turn back now. As he reached the edge of the woods, he heard a rustling in the shadows, and from the darkness stepped Medea, her cloak drawn about her, her face pale in the moonlight. Jason was startled, yet he bowed his head respectfully, sensing both her power and her inner turmoil. She spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of decision. "Stranger," she said, "you cannot hope to master the bulls or to withstand the earthborn warriors with strength alone. But if you will trust me, I can aid you. The gods have given me knowledge of herbs and charms, of powers hidden from men. With these, you may survive the trials my father has set." Jason listened intently, his heart quickening. He knew the risk she was taking. To defy her father was treachery of the highest kind. Yet her words carried truth, and the flicker of hope they offered was like a flame in the dark. He stepped closer, speaking with quiet earnestness. "I know the peril I face, and I know I cannot prevail without help. If you will give me your aid, Medea, I swear by the gods that I will honor you above all others. When I return to my homeland, I will make you my bride, and your name shall be forever bound with mine." Her eyes softened, though doubt still lingered. To trust him was to place her fate in the hands of a foreigner. Yet something in his voice, in the way he spoke not as a conqueror but as a man humbled before destiny, stirred her soul. She drew from beneath her cloak a small vial of shimmering liquid, and with it a bundle of herbs. "This is a charm prepared with the blessings of Hecate," she explained. "Rub this ointment upon your skin and upon your shield and spear. The fire of the bulls will not harm you, nor will their bronze hooves crush you. When you face the earthborn warriors, do not meet them blow for blow. Instead, hail a stone among them. In their confusion, they will turn upon one another, and by their own hands they shall fall." Jason took the vial reverently, his eyes never leaving hers. Gratitude welled within him, and though the hour was late, he swore again upon the gods that he would keep his word. Medea, trembling at the depth of her choice, whispered a prayer over him, calling upon Hecate's protection. In that moment, the bond between them was sealed, not merely by words, but by the silent understanding that their fates had entwined. Before she departed, she pressed a final warning upon him. "Do not linger when the task is done. My father is cunning and cruel, and though he has promised you the fleece, he will not part with it willingly. Be ready, for when the time comes, you and I must flee together. Only then can you truly claim your prize." With that, she vanished back into the shadows, leaving Jason to stand beneath the stars, the vial of magic clutched in his hand and his heart alight with new resolve. He returned to his companions, who slept unaware of the pact that had just been struck. The river lapped softly at the Argo's side, the night wind whispered through the reeds, and the world seemed to pause at the threshold of destiny. By dawn, the trials would begin. Jason would walk into the fire of the bulls and the fury of earthborn warriors, armed not only with courage and steel, but with the secret aid of Medea, whose heart had chosen him against the will of her blood. And though no one yet knew it, her choice would shape the course of the quest and the fate of every soul aboard the Argo. The first light of dawn spilled across the fields of Colchis, painting the earth with gold and crimson. The city awoke in excitement, for word had spread quickly that this day the foreigner, Jason, would attempt the impossible. Crowds gathered along the edges of the royal fields, their voices murmuring with a mixture of anticipation and scorn. Most believed they were about to witness another doomed adventurer consumed by the wrath of the fire-breathing bulls. King Eats himself took his seat upon a high platform, draped in robes of flame-colored silk, his expression calm yet proud. At his side stood Medea, her gaze lowered, her hands folded tightly together as though to conceal her trembling. None around her knew the weight she carried, the secret pact she had made, the magic she had given. To her, this was not mere spectacle but the testing ground of both her courage and Jason's. The gates of the bronze stables were thrown open with a resounding clang. From within came a thunderous sound, like hammers striking anvils, followed by a blast of scorching air. Then the creatures emerged. The bulls of Hephaestus were monstrous, each the size of a war chariot, their hides dark and gleaming like burnished bronze. Sparks leapt from their hooves as they struck the earth, and from their wide nostrils roared gouts of flame, searing the ground and filling the air with smoke. Their eyes glowed like coals, and the crowd drew back in fear even as a rippled through them. Jason stepped forward from among the Argonauts. His companions watched with tense faces, knowing the peril he faced, yet trusting in his resolve. Before him, hidden beneath his tunic, his skin shone faintly where he had rubbed Medea's ointment, the charm that promised protection against fire and steel. His shield gleamed, its surface smeared with the same enchantment, and in his hand he carried a sturdy spear. He did not tremble, though inside his heart pounded like a drum. The bulls snorted, flames curling from their nostrils, and pawed the ground as though eager to destroy. The earth itself seemed to shake as they charged, their speed terrifying for beasts so massive. The crowd gasped, certain that Jason would be crushed in an instant. Yet as the first bull's fiery breath engulfed him, the flames curled harmlessly against his enchanted skin. His shield glowed faintly, but he remained unharmed. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the Colchians, and even Eats narrowed his eyes, suspicion flickering across his face. Jason held his ground. With practiced strength and calm precision, he seized the bull by its horn as it thundered past. The force was immense, yet he braced his body, calling upon every ounce of his courage. The ointment not only shielded him from flame, but gave him the strength to endure. With a mighty heave, he wrestled the beast down, pressing its fiery head toward the ground. The second bull roared and charged, but Jason, moving swiftly, managed to dodge aside and catch its horns as well. The sight was almost beyond belief. A single man grappling with monsters forged by the god of fire and holding them at bay. Sweat poured from his brow, yet his resolve did not falter. With great effort, he forced the beast toward the waiting yoke. His companions cheered from the sidelines, though their voices were nearly drowned by the crackle of fire and the roar of the bulls. The Colchians, watching in stunned silence, could scarcely believe their eyes. At last, with one final surge of strength, Jason secured the yoke upon the bulls' necks. The beasts bellowed in fury, flames spilling into the sky, but they were bound. He had achieved what no man before had even dared attempt. The crowd erupted in shouts, half in admiration, half in disbelief. Eats, though outwardly composed, clenched his jaw, for he had not expected the foreigner to succeed. Jason, without delay, took hold of the plow and urged the bulls forward. The earth scorched beneath their hooves, yet the furrows opened in neat, blackened lines across the field. The Argonauts shouted encouragement, their voices rising with pride, for their leader had done the impossible. Row by row, Jason drove the fire-breathing beasts, the scent of smoke and burning soil filling the air, until the field lay tilled, ready for the next stage of Eats' cruel command. As he released the yoke and stepped back, Jason raised his gaze to the king, standing tall, his chest heaving but his spirit unbroken. The task that had seemed beyond mortal power was complete. The bulls snorted and pawed the ground, but they were subdued, their flames no longer a threat. The crowd, awestruck, could not contain their cries, and many whispered that perhaps the gods truly favored this man. In the shadows of the platform, Medea's lips curved into the faintest smile, though she quickly lowered her head. Her heart swelled with both relief and fear, relief that Jason had survived, and fear of what her father would suspect. For Eats' eyes had turned toward her more than once, suspicion gnawing at his certainty. Yet the day was not finished. Though Jason had yoked the bulls and plowed the field, the greater peril lay ahead, the sowing of the dragon's teeth, and the army of warriors that would rise from the earth. The crowd still cheered, but in Eats' silence there was a darker promise. He would not yield the fleece so easily, and Jason's greatest challenge was yet to come. The sun was still high when the first task ended, and though Jason stood triumphant, the air in Colchis was heavy with anticipation. The fire-breathing bulls had been yoked, the fields plowed by their searing hooves, and still King Eats had not spoken. His face remained carved from stone, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes fixed on Jason with a cold intensity. The crowd murmured in disbelief and awe, yet they too knew the trial was not over. All eyes turned toward the king, waiting for him to pronounce the next stage of his challenge. Eats rose slowly from his throne, his robe shimmering in the sunlight. His voice carried across the field, smooth and measured, though laced with venom. You have done what no stranger before you has accomplished. You have driven the bulls of Hephaestus and plowed the earth of Colchis. Yet this alone does not prove you worthy of the Golden Fleece. Now you must complete the task as I have decreed. Take these, he said, and with a wave of his hand servants brought forth a bronze vessel filled with hard, gleaming objects, the teeth of a dragon, sewn from the very monster slain by Cadmus in the time of the Theban kings. Cast them into the furrows you have made, and from the soil will rise warriors clad in bronze. If you would prove yourself, you must face them and survive. The crowd stirred with excitement, for this was the part of the spectacle they longed for. None believed Jason could prevail against an army born from the earth itself. The Argonauts tightened their grips on their weapons, anger flashing across their faces at the cruelty of the demand. But Jason lifted his hand, calming them. He knew this was a trial Medea had foreseen, and he trusted her counsel. Taking the vessel, he walked into the field, the furrows still smoking from the fire of the bulls. The dragon's teeth clinked as he lifted them, sharp and unnatural, glinting with a strange light. His heart was steady, for Medea's words echoed in his mind. Do not meet them blow for blow. Cast a stone among them, and they will turn upon themselves. With careful steps, Jason scattered the teeth across the tilled rows. The earth trembled in response. At first, there was silence. Then the soil began to shift, to heave, as though the land itself was alive. Slowly, shapes emerged from the ground. Men, but not born of woman. They rose fully grown, armored in bronze, their faces fierce and without pity, their spears and shields already in hand. One by one, dozens of them climbed out of the earth, until the field was filled with an army forged from the dragon's teeth, gleaming in the sunlight, their eyes empty but burning with the will to fight. The Colchians gasped, for even they felt fear at the sight of the earthborn warriors. Jason alone stood at the center of the field, his shield raised, his body gleaming faintly from Medea's protective charm. The soldiers advanced, their steps heavy and relentless, their spears pointed toward him. It seemed hopeless, a single man against a host. Then Jason remembered Medea's gift. With a swift motion, he bent, grasped a large stone from the scorched soil, and hurled it with all his strength into the midst of the advancing ranks. The rock struck the ground with a resounding crack, and instantly confusion erupted. The earthborn warriors, uncertain of who had cast the stone, turned upon one another. Their voices rose in guttural cries as spears flew and shields clashed. In moments, the field was filled with chaos. Jason held his ground, watching as the warriors fought among themselves. Sparks flew from clashing bronze, the sound of battle echoing like thunder across the plain. One by one, the soldiers fell, slain by their own brothers in arms, their bodies crashing heavily into the soil that had birthed them. The crowd shouted in amazement, unable to comprehend how Jason had turned the king's own challenge against itself. Still, a few warriors remained, breaking free from the melee and charging toward Jason. With spear in hand, he met them boldly. His enchanted shield absorbed their blows, and with precise strikes he felled them, one after another. His movements were steady, deliberate, his courage unwavering. Soon the last of the earthborn soldiers collapsed upon the field, the soil reclaiming their bodies until nothing was left but silence. Jason stood alone, his chest rising and falling with effort, but his spirit unshaken. He had endured the fire of the bulls and the fury of the warriors born from dragon's teeth. The field lay quiet, scorched and torn, yet his figure shone against it, the lone victor of a trial meant to be his doom. The Colchians erupted in cries of disbelief. Some shouted praise, others whispered fearfully, for they saw in Jason not merely a man but a figure touched by destiny. Each remained silent, though his jaw tightened, his eyes dark with suppressed rage. He had hoped Jason would perish, and now he was forced to watch his daughter's secret aid bear fruit before the eyes of his people. Jason, lifting his spear, saluted the king. His voice was calm but resolute. "I have done as you commanded, O king. The field is plowed, the teeth sown, and the warriors defeated. Now, as you have sworn, grant me the Golden Fleece." The demand rang clear, and though the crowd murmured, Eats gave no answer. He turned instead to his advisors, his expression betraying nothing. Jason's heart told him that though the trials were over, the battle for the fleece had only just begun. For Eats, cunning and treacherous, would never surrender such a prize willingly. And in the shadows of the king's silence, Medea's heart beat fast, knowing that soon her choice to defy her father must be made openly. The trials had been conquered, but the true peril, the treachery of kings and the test of loyalty and love, was still to come. Night fell over Colchis with a deep, heavy silence, broken only by the distant lapping of the river against the banks. The trials had been completed. Jason had yoked the fire-breathing bulls, tilled the fields, and sown the dragon's teeth, defeating the warriors that had risen from the soil. The crowd had witnessed the impossible, and even the bravest Colchians were filled with awe and fear. Yet within the palace walls, a storm of a different kind raged, one of anger, suspicion, and a daughter's choice that would alter the course of fate. Medea paced silently in her chambers, her mind torn. Her father, King Eats, was powerful, clever, and ruthless, and the consequences of defying him were grave. Yet her heart had chosen, and the decision she had made in secret was now ready to be acted upon. She gathered her magical implements, the herbs, the charms, the incantations she had learned under the tutelage of Hecate herself, and prepared to aid Jason fully. This was no longer a matter of subtle protection. The time had come to guide him directly to the Golden Fleece. Meanwhile, Jason rested in the Argonauts' camp, unaware that his companion and guide would soon act. His mind wandered to the enormity of the tasks he had completed, and the thought of the prize he had sought for so long filled him with both hope and tension. The fleece was near, yet guarded by enchantments, monsters, and the cunning of a king who would never surrender willingly. His heart, however, also carried a quiet hope he did not yet understand. The hope that the foreign princess who had aided him in secret would step forth openly and join him in this final endeavor. As midnight approached, Medea crept silently through the palace, her cloak drawn close around her. Every shadow and corridor carried the risk of discovery, but her resolve was unwavering. She descended to the grove where the Golden Fleece hung, a sacred place consecrated to the gods, and one that none of the king's men dared enter without permission. The fleece itself glimmered with a strange, golden light, and the air around it seemed to hum with a low, powerful energy, as if it recognized the worthiness of those who approached. Jason, guided by whispered instructions and secret signs, followed cautiously behind her. Medea moved with grace, her knowledge of the palace and its hidden paths allowing them to avoid sentries and traps. Her heart pounded with every step, yet she pressed onward, knowing that her choice would change both their destinies. At last, they reached the grove, where the fleece hung suspended from a gnarled oak, its golden fibers catching even the faintest light of the moon. "Be careful," Medea whispered, her hand guiding him toward the enchanted prize. "The fleece is protected by magic older than man can name, and by a guardian dragon that sleeps but does not forget. You must act swiftly and decisively. I can aid you, but you must be brave." Jason nodded, the weight of the moment pressing upon him. He stepped forward as Medea began her incantations, her hands weaving the charms and spells that would lull the dragon into slumber. The air grew thick and heavy, tinged with the scent of herbs and sacred smoke. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, and from the shadows emerged the great guardian, a serpent-like dragon with scales that glimmered like molten gold, eyes like twin embers glowing in the dark. Its hiss filled the grove, sharp and terrifying, yet it did not strike. Medea's magic held it in a deep, enchanted sleep, and Jason moved carefully toward the fleece. He lifted the Golden Fleece from the branch, its weight lighter than he expected yet filled with a power he could almost feel pulsing through his hands. The grove seemed to sigh in relief, as though the fleece recognized the courage and cleverness of its new keeper. Medea breathed a quiet prayer to Hecate, her heart swelling with both triumph and fear, for she knew that Aesop's wrath would be terrible when he discovered the theft. With the fleece secured, they retraced their steps, moving swiftly and silently through the palace corridors. Every shadow seemed to whisper danger, every creaking floorboard a potential alarm, yet Medea's knowledge of secret passages allowed them to avoid detection. When at last they emerged outside into the cool night air, the river reflecting the moon like a silver ribbon, a sense of relief and exhilaration washed over them. The Golden Fleece was theirs, but there was no time to celebrate. Medea's father would soon realize the theft, and Aetes was a man of cunning and vengeance. Their escape had to be immediate, swift, and unerring. Jason turned to Medea, gratitude and awe in his eyes. "I could not have done this without you," he said softly. "You have risked everything for me, for us." Medea's hand brushed his, a silent promise shared between them. "The gods have guided us," she replied. "Now we must leave, and only together can we hope to survive what is coming." And so, under the cover of night, Jason and Medea, united by courage, love, and destiny, began their flight from Colchis, carrying with them the Golden Fleece that had eluded heroes and kings for generations. The grove grew silent behind them, its sacred magic watching and waiting, as the first steps of their perilous journey into the unknown began. The night air was thick and heavy as Jason and Medea led the Argonauts away from the grove where the Golden Fleece had hung, its golden fibers now clutched tightly in their hands. Every step was measured, cautious, yet urgent, for the sound of the city and the palace seemed to echo with the inevitable discovery of their daring theft. The river Phasis glimmered faintly under the moonlight, and the Argo waited at the hidden cove, her hull dark against the rippling water. The men moved silently, hearts pounding, every rustle of leaves or distant shout threatening to betray their presence. King Aetes, roused from sleep by the sudden disappearance of the fleece, was a tempest incarnate. His fury was as relentless as the sun's fire, his mind racing with schemes to reclaim what he had guarded for so long. He immediately summoned his guards and ordered the city's gates closed. But it was too late. The Argonauts were already moving. Mounted riders and swift-foot soldiers were dispatched in pursuit, their torches flickering against the darkness as they raced along the riverbank. Aetes himself remained behind, calculating and cold, knowing that even distance could not prevent him from reclaiming his treasure. Jason, leading the crew, urged the men to row swiftly. The Argo cut through the waters with practiced speed, the oars moving in rhythmic unity as the Argonauts pulled with every ounce of strength in their bodies. Behind them, the distant shouts of Colchian pursuers rang across the river, a constant reminder that the night offered no reprieve. The river twisted and turned through the forests, and Jason guided the Argo with keen awareness, knowing every bend could be a trap, every shallow a danger to their escape. Medea stood near the prow, her hands clasped over the fleece, her eyes alert. She whispered charms under her breath, small incantations that wove protective wards around the ship, keeping it hidden from both eyes and magic that Aetes might use to track them. Her heart raced, not from fear of the river or the soldiers, but from a knowledge that her betrayal of her father would bring a storm of vengeance unlike anything she had ever known. Yet she had chosen this path, and her courage was as vital to their survival as Jason's strength and leadership. As they pressed further into the winding river, obstacles began to appear. Fallen trees, sudden shallows, and narrow passages threatened to slow their progress. But Jason's experience as a leader, and the loyalty and skill of the Argonauts, allowed them to navigate these perils. The heroes, Hercules, Orpheus, and the others, kept their eyes sharp, their muscles tense, ready to fend off any attack from the pursuing Colchians. Even the normally fearless Hercules felt the thrill of danger in his veins, knowing that a single misstep could spell doom for them all. Behind them, the pursuit intensified. Aetes's men, familiar with the terrain, moved swiftly, shouting orders and attempting to block the Argo's path. Jason responded with cunning rather than brute force, guiding the ship through hidden channels and small tributaries that the pursuers could not follow. Medea's magic helped, subtly altering the perception of the river, creating illusions of walls or shifting the reflection of the moonlight to mislead the enemy. The Colchians cursed and shouted in frustration, realizing too late that their prey was guided by more than mortal skill alone. As hours passed, the darkness of the night deepened, shrouding the river in shadows. The Argonauts were exhausted, their arms aching from the unceasing rowing, yet adrenaline and determination drove them onward. Jason's mind raced with plans, not only to escape Eatz's immediate pursuit, but also to ensure that the fleece reached home safely. Every bend in the river could hide another ambush, every glimmer of moonlight a potential sign of danger, but his focus never wavered. Finally, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the immediate pursuit began to fade. The Colchians had been delayed by the narrow channels and illusions cast by media, and the Argonauts now had a small, precious lead. Exhausted yet exhilarated, they pulled the Argo onto a small, concealed bank to rest. The river, calm and glittering in the early morning light, seemed almost peaceful now, as if acknowledging the courage and cleverness of those who had navigated its treacherous waters. Medea, finally allowing herself a moment of relief, glanced at Jason. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange was a recognition of what they had risked and accomplished. They had defied a king, cheated fate, and carried the Golden Fleece beyond the reach of its guardian. Yet both knew this was only the beginning. Each would not forget, and the journey back to Iolcus would bring dangers as great, if not greater, than those they had already faced. The Argonauts rested briefly, tending to their exhausted bodies and preparing for the next stage of their journey. Though the immediate danger had passed, the knowledge that Eatz's wrath would pursue them forever lingered, a shadow on the horizon. And in the quiet, unspoken bond between Jason and Medea, a promise had been made. They would face whatever came together, their courage, love, and cunning their only shield against the storms yet to come. The Argonauts set sail from the banks of the river Phasis, the early morning light glinting off the waves as the Argo slipped quietly into open waters. Behind them, the distant shores of Colchis receded into mist, though the shadow of King Eatz's anger lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. The men were weary from the trials, the theft of the Golden Fleece, and the tense flight through enemy territory, yet there was no time for prolonged rest. The sea was vast, unpredictable, and filled with dangers both natural and supernatural, and every oarstroke carried them closer to home, and closer to new perils. The first days of the journey were calm, the river giving way to the wide expanse of the Black Sea. The Argonauts settled into a rhythm, the oars slicing through the water in perfect harmony. Orpheus strummed his lyre gently, his music soothing the nerves of the crew and carrying the soft cadence of sleep for those who could steal a moment of rest. Yet even amid this calm, the horizon was never empty, and the men remained vigilant. Tales of monsters, sirens, and violent storms whispered through the ship-like shadows, a reminder that the gods themselves seemed to watch their journey. As they rounded the northern coast, the waters grew colder, darker, and more restless. Gale winds arose without warning, tossing the Argo's sturdy frame upon the waves like a leaf caught in a storm. The men strained at the oars, their muscles burning, but the ship's bow cut through the tumultuous waters, guided by Jason's steady hand. He shouted encouragement over the roar of wind and crashing waves, his voice carrying authority and calm despite the chaos surrounding them. Medea, standing near the prow, invoked protective spells, murmuring incantations to shield the ship from the worst of the storm. Her magic shimmered faintly, a subtle light against the dark gray of the tempest. Then came the first monstrous obstacle of the open sea, a towering creature with scales glimmering like obsidian and eyes that reflected the storm's fury. The serpent-like being rose from the depths, thrashing and splashing, its massive form threatening to capsize the Argo. The Argonauts recoiled in fear, but Jason, remembering Medea's counsel and his own years of training and experience, called upon the crew to maintain formation. Orpheus's music rang clear, harmonizing with the rhythm of their rowing, and Medea cast a spell to confuse the creature, sending waves of illusion that made the serpent strike at phantom images rather than the real ship. With patience, courage, and cunning, the Argonauts guided the Argo past the monster, leaving it thrashing in the churning waters behind them. The journey was long and arduous. Days blended into nights, each bringing new challenges. Gale winds, sudden squalls, and treacherous reefs tested the skill and endurance of every man aboard. Sometimes the sea would calm unexpectedly, lulling the crew into a false sense of security, only for waves taller than towers to rise without warning. Food and water became scarce, and the men had to ration carefully, their bodies and minds straining under the relentless pressure of the open ocean. Yet the sight of the Golden Fleece, secured safely in the hold, reminded them of their purpose and gave them the resolve to endure. One night, as they sailed past the coast of modern-day Turkey, a siren's song reached the Argo, soft and seductive, weaving through the waves like a dream. The crew felt the pull immediately, a sense of longing and drowsiness threatening to lull them into the ocean's depths. Jason, aware of the danger, ordered the men to plug their ears with wax, following a precaution taught by earlier sailors' tales. Orpheus, using his lyre, drowned out the melody with countermelodies, a soothing harmony that guided the Argonauts safely past the bewitching call. Medea whispered protective charms, ensuring that no one succumbed to the perilous temptation. As the days stretched into weeks, the Argonauts grew both stronger and more wary. They navigated islands inhabited by strange peoples, avoided hidden shoals, and endured storms that tested both the ship and the spirit of the crew. Jason's leadership became more resolute, balancing courage, strategy, and care for his men. Medea's guidance proved invaluable, her magic subtly manipulating winds and currents, calming tempests where she could, and offering hope where fear threatened to dominate. Each night, Orpheus's music lulled the exhausted crew into rest, his songs weaving tales of heroes past and omens of their own fate, offering both comfort and quiet vigilance. At last, after months at sea, the coast of Greece appeared on the horizon, the familiar sight a balm to the weary men's hearts. Yet even as they neared home, Jason knew the journey was not yet over. Eatz's wrath was far from spent, and other dangers, both mortal and divine, still awaited them. The Golden Fleece, shining with its sacred, unearthly glow, was safe for now, but the final trials of loyalty, cunning, and endurance would soon test the Argonauts again. The Argo sailed on, slicing through the shimmering waters, carrying not only the prize they had fought so hard to obtain, but also the bond forged between Jason and Medea, a bond of courage, trust, and love that would guide them through the final stages of their epic journey. The Mediterranean stretched before them, vast and unpredictable, yet for the first time in months, hope mingled with weariness in the hearts of the heroes.
The coast of Iolcus emerged slowly from the morning mist, its cliffs and harbors familiar yet foreboding. After months at sea, the Argonauts' journey home was nearly complete, and the Golden Fleece rested securely within the Argo's hold, shimmering with a soft, otherworldly light. Yet the sense of relief was tempered by unease. Jason knew that while the perils of the sea had tested their courage, the dangers awaiting them at home were no less deadly. His uncle, King Peleus, still ruled Iolcus with cunning and cruelty, and the fleece, so hard-won, would make him even more desperate to seize power and crush any who threatened his rule. The Argo glided into the harbor under the cover of dawn, the soft mist hiding them from immediate detection. The men worked silently, lowering the sails and securing the oars, wary of spies or loyalists to Peleus who might attempt to sabotage their arrival. Medea, standing beside Jason, felt the tension in the air like a tangible weight. Her heart pounded, not from the exertions of the voyage, but from the knowledge that the most dangerous trial yet, the politics, cunning, and vengeance of King Peleus, was about to begin. Jason stepped onto the docks with calm authority, his cloak brushing against the wooden planks. The townspeople, seeing him return after so long, murmured in awe, some excited by his exploits, others fearful of Peleus' wrath should they show support. Whispers of the Golden Fleece and the legendary feats of the Argonauts spread quickly, and eyes followed them as they moved through the harbor. Even the most loyal subjects felt a flicker of fear of both Peleus and the prophecy that surrounded Jason's return. King Peleus, upon learning that Jason had returned, received the news with a mixture of rage and calculation. He was a man who ruled not merely through authority but through fear, and the idea that his nephew had survived impossible trials, returned with the fleece, and gained both courage and followers was intolerable. Summoning his advisors and guards, he devised a plan to eliminate Jason without openly declaring war, relying instead on cunning, deceit, and the use of those who believed in his cause. Jason, aware of Peleus' nature and cunning, did not act hastily. He entered the city cautiously, speaking to the elders and citizens with humility and calm, recounting the trials, the monsters faced, and the fleece's power. The people were captivated, their fear mingling with admiration and hope. Stories of Jason's bravery, combined with the wonder of Medea's magic, spread through Iolcus like wildfire. Yet beneath the awe and respect lurked the tension of uncertainty. Who could be trusted, and who would betray them to Peleus? Medea, sensing the danger, counseled Jason quietly. "Do not confront him directly," she whispered. "Peleus is clever and cruel. We must act indirectly, using his pride and fears against him. The fleece itself is proof that you are worthy, yet it is not the fleece alone that will secure your future. It is the wisdom, patience, and cunning with which we act." Jason nodded, absorbing her guidance. Her knowledge of sorcery and subtle manipulation would be indispensable in confronting a king who relied on strategy as much as on power. Peleus, hearing of Jason's approach and the acclaim of the people, feigned cordiality, inviting Jason into his palace under the guise of reconciliation. The halls were grand, decorated with symbols of Peleus' rule, yet every corner seemed to whisper caution. Jason walked steadily, aware that the smallest misstep could lead to betrayal or death. The king greeted him with measured words, hiding the storm of fury behind a mask of politeness. "Welcome home, nephew," Peleus said, his tone smooth and practiced. "I have heard of your exploits and the golden fleece you claim to possess. Truly, your courage is remarkable." But beneath the words lay a sharp edge, a silent threat. Peleus' eyes flickered toward Medea, suspicion and curiosity mixing with unspoken warning. Jason, steady and composed, presented the fleece with reverence, holding it aloft for all to see. Its golden glow filled the room, and for a moment, even the king seemed to falter, caught between awe and envy. Yet Peleus was not easily shaken. "The fleece is indeed magnificent," he said, his voice steady. "But tell me, Jason, is it not more fitting that such a prize be wielded under my guidance? After all, I am the ruler of Iolcus, and the city must have a protector stronger than any hero returned from distant lands." His words dripped with subtle manipulation, a challenge cloaked as counsel. Jason understood immediately. Open confrontation would be disastrous. Instead, he and Medea began to weave a plan, using Peleus' own pride and ambition as instruments to achieve justice without spilling blood in the hall. Thus began the delicate dance of power, strategy, and magic within Iolcus. Jason's return was a triumph, yet every step was measured, every word deliberate. With Medea's guidance and the respect of the people, he prepared to confront his uncle's treachery, not through force alone, but through cunning, patience, and the promise of destiny fulfilled. The final battle for the rightful claim to Iolcus was not one of swords or monsters, but of minds and hearts, where the true strength of Jason and his allies would be tested. The palace of Iolcus was quiet at first, a deceptive calm that stretched across the marbled halls and gilded chambers. The city outside buzzed with rumors, whispers of Jason's return and the legendary golden fleece he carried. For weeks, the people had watched the tides of fear and hope swell, waiting to see if the man who had faced fire-breathing bulls, dragon's teeth warriors, and a treacherous king's wrath would be clever enough to reclaim what was rightfully his. Jason moved through the palace with measured calm, his eyes steady, his mind focused, aware that the greatest challenge he faced was not monsters of distant lands, but the cunning of his own uncle, King Peleus. Medea stood close by, her presence a quiet anchor. She had spent days weaving spells of subtlety and persuasion, charms designed to influence hearts without revealing their true power. Her plan was dangerous, dependent entirely on Peleus' arrogance and his willingness to follow advice without suspicion. The fleece was safe in the hold of the Argo, but Jason knew that the true prize, the security of his homeland and the end of Peleus' tyranny, required patience, cunning, and the careful orchestration of events. Jason requested an audience with Peleus, who received him with a polite, measured smile, hiding his simmering rage behind a mask of civility. The king's advisors flanked him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, while the halls themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Jason bowed respectfully but did not falter in his gaze. "I have returned, uncle, as you commanded," he said softly, yet with authority. "I bring not only tales of distant lands and impossible trials, but a chance for Iolcus to thrive under a future worthy of its people." Peleus inclined his head slightly, concealing his suspicion. "Indeed, Jason," he replied, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I hear of your feats, and of the Golden Fleece you have claimed. It is said that no mortal could achieve what you have accomplished. But tell me, what do you intend to do with such a treasure? Will it serve the city, or merely the ambition of one man?" Jason's eyes flickered briefly to Medea, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He spoke carefully, each word deliberate. "The city must prosper, uncle, and for that, it requires wisdom as much as courage. The fleece is powerful, yet the true strength lies in the guidance of those who serve the people faithfully. You have ruled for many years, but there are tasks you cannot accomplish without help. It is time for new counsel to shape the future of Iolcus." Peleus, prideful and cunning, bristled at the suggestion but hid it well. "And what counsel would you offer, Jason? What wisdom have you gained from the farthest corners of the world that could surpass the authority I hold here?" It was Medea who answered, her voice soft yet compelling. "There is a way to renew the strength of the city," she said, her eyes glinting with controlled intensity. "An elixir, made from the most potent herbs and spells, that can restore youth and vigor to those who have grown old and weary. It is said to grant vitality and power beyond measure. All that is needed is a demonstration of your faith in it." Peleus' eyes lit up with intrigue. He had long feared aging and the limits it imposed, and the idea of regaining his strength through a miraculous potion was irresistible. He leaned forward eagerly, curiosity overtaking suspicion. "Show me this elixir," he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anticipation and greed. Medea smiled faintly, concealing the true nature of a craft. She claimed that the preparation required careful attention and secrecy, and she would need Peleus' daughters to assist, for the magic worked only when guided by the hands of those who loved him. Flattered and eager to regain his youth, Peleus summoned his daughters, who trusted the foreign princess with hope in their hearts. Medea instructed them to chop and boil herbs under her careful guidance, all the while whispering subtle enchantments that ensured the potion would appear potent yet harmless. As Peleus' daughters prepared the concoction, Medea subtly manipulated the scene, her magic and cunning ensuring that Peleus would believe in the elixir's efficacy. When the moment came, she directed the daughters to demonstrate on Peleus himself, claiming that a symbolic act of washing and purification would transfer the elixir's power. Peleus, blinded by desire and ambition, followed their guidance without hesitation. The result was immediate and devastating. The ritual backfired, as Medea had secretly infused the demonstration with a spell that caused Peleus to falter fatally. He collapsed, unable to recover, the arrogance and greed that had ruled him undone by his own folly. The city of Iolcus was stunned. Word spread quickly of Peleus' fall, and though fear lingered, admiration for Jason's wisdom and Medea's cunning grew. The people realized that the Golden Fleece was more than a prize. It symbolized the restoration of justice, the triumph of cleverness and courage over tyranny and cruelty. Jason, standing tall, addressed the city calmly yet with authority. "Peleus' reign has ended," he said, "and Iolcus shall now be governed with fairness, courage, and wisdom. The fleece is a reminder of what can be achieved through bravery, trust, and careful action. Let us build a city worthy of the gods and of ourselves." Medea remained by his side, a quiet yet powerful presence, her magic having guided them through every peril, from Colchis to the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean, and finally to the palace itself. Jason acknowledged as silently, the bond between them strengthened by every trial they had faced together. The people of Iolcus, witnessing the cleverness of their new ruler and the quiet strength of his companion, began to see hope where there had once been fear, and trust where there had once been suspicion. With Peleus' treachery removed and the Golden Fleece secured, Jason and Medea turned their attention to the restoration of Iolcus. Fields were tended, ships repaired, and alliances reforged. The city thrived under their guidance, a testament to the wisdom of combining courage with strategy, action with foresight, and love with loyalty. The fleece was placed in a sacred hall, not merely as a trophy, but as a symbol of the journey they had endured, the perils they had overcome, and the enduring power of cleverness, bravery, and unity. The sun set over Iolcus, casting a golden light over the city that mirrored the glow of the fleece. Jason and Medea stood together, looking out over the harbor where the Argo rested, her sails lowered, her hull safe and secure. The trials were over, yet the story of their journey would live on, whispered in the songs of poets, the tales of storytellers, and the quiet imaginations of those who dreamed of heroism, love, and the extraordinary triumphs of the human spirit. For Jason, Medea, and the Argonauts, the end of the journey was not merely the reclaiming of a kingdom or the possession of a prize. It was the affirmation that courage, intelligence, and trust, when combined with loyalty and love, could overcome even the greatest of obstacles. And as night fell softly over Iolcus, the city slept in peace, knowing that its future was safe, its heroes triumphant, and its stories eternal. As the city of Iolcus settled into the quiet of evening, a gentle hush fell over the streets and the harbor. The bustle of celebration had faded, leaving only the soft glow of lamps and the distant murmur of the sea against the shore. Jason stood at the palace balcony, gazing at the horizon where the sun had dipped beneath the waters, leaving trails of gold and crimson that reflected the majesty of a journey now complete. Beside him, Medea stood quietly, her hand brushing against his in a moment of calm understanding. The Golden Fleece rested in a place of honor, its radiant fibers shimmering faintly even in the dimming light, a reminder of the trials, courage, and wisdom that had brought them to this peaceful moment. The voyage of the Argo and the adventures that had carried them across treacherous seas, foreign lands, and divine challenges seemed almost dreamlike now. Jason reflected upon the fire-breathing bulls, the dragon's teeth, the cunning schemes of King Eats, and the countless perils of the Mediterranean waters. Each obstacle had tested not only physical strength but the fortitude of spirit, the clarity of judgment, and the bonds between companions. He thought of his crew, each Argonaut whose loyalty and skill had been vital, Hercules, whose strength seemed boundless yet tempered with careful awareness, Orpheus, whose music soothed hearts and guided minds even through the darkest hours, and countless others whose courage and perseverance had shaped the course of their shared destiny. Medea, her eyes still reflecting the glow of the fleece, spoke softly. "The journey is more than the prize we hold," she said. "It is the lessons we have learned, the trust we have forged, and the understanding of our own strengths and limitations. Every step, every challenge, has brought clarity, not just to the body, but to the heart and mind." Jason nodded, feeling the truth of her words ripple through him. The fleece, though a symbol of triumph, was also a symbol of the virtues required to achieve it: courage, patience, cunning, and unwavering loyalty to one another. As night deepened, Jason thought about the trials in Colchis and the flight from Eats. The fire-breathing bulls had seemed insurmountable, yet with calm resolve and Medea's aid, they had been yoked and tamed. The dragon's teeth had risen like an army of wrathful spirits, and yet with ingenuity and the strategic counsel of his companions, the threat had been turned upon itself. The theft of the fleece, guided by Medea's knowledge and the precision of timing, had required subtlety and courage far beyond what any mortal might anticipate. Every decision, every action, had demanded patience, faith, and a deep understanding of the forces at play, both mortal and divine. He thought, too, of their journey home, when the sea had become both friend and foe. Storms had battered the Argo, yet the crew's rhythm and teamwork had carried them through. Monsters had risen from the depths, testing their resolve and cunning. Sirens had sung their beguiling songs, tempting even the strongest with dreams of surrender. Yet Orpheus's music, combined with Medea's protective magic, had guided them safely through each trial. The sea itself seemed a living entity, unpredictable and powerful, yet responsive to courage and cleverness, to harmony and insight. Returning to Iolcus had presented another layer of complexity. Peleus, cunning and ruthless, ruled with the tension of fear and power. Jason had to navigate the delicate web of political intrigue, ensuring the people's trust while avoiding the king's treacherous maneuvers. Medea's guidance, her understanding of both human pride and mystical influence, had been pivotal. By turning Peleus' arrogance against him, they had achieved victory without bloodshed within the palace walls. The city had witnessed not merely the triumph of a hero but the demonstration of wisdom, patience, and strategy, qualities that often surpass sheer strength in their power to shape destiny. Now, standing at the balcony, Jason and Medea reflected on the subtle but profound transformations wrought by their journey. The Golden Fleece, the radiant and extraordinary, was no longer merely an object of desire. It had become a symbol of endurance, trust, and the unity of courage and intellect. Each challenge they faced had revealed new dimensions of themselves and their companions, lessons that would remain long after the fleece was placed in its honored position. The people of Iolcus, too, had changed. Witnessing the Argonauts' return, they saw not only the power of a single hero but the importance of collaboration, guidance, and moral courage. The story of Jason and Medea, of the crew's loyalty, and of the trials they had endured became a gentle legend in the city's collective memory, a tale whispered to children, recounted in quiet moments, and honored as a narrative of hope and perseverance. In the quiet streets, the citizens felt the reassurance of stability restored, the balance of justice achieved, and the promise that courage tempered by wisdom can overcome even the most formidable obstacles. As the night deepened, Jason and Medea wandered along the quiet harbor, the Argo resting silently in the water. The moon cast a soft silver glow across the waves, reflecting the calm after months of storm and turmoil. Jason's thoughts drifted gently, recalling not only the dangers but the small, peaceful moments that had sustained them. The lull of the river phases, the shared meals aboard the Argo, Orpheus's soothing music echoing across the deck, and Medea's quiet reassurances during moments of uncertainty. These memories, subtle yet powerful, were as essential to their journey as the feats of bravery themselves. In the soft night, Jason and Medea spoke of the future, not as rulers alone, but as partners in the continuation of their shared story. They discussed the importance of guiding Iolcus with fairness, fostering wisdom and courage among its citizens, and ensuring that the lessons of their journey endured beyond their own lifetimes. The fleece, while a symbol of victory, was also a reminder of the virtues that had led them to triumph. Patience in adversity, courage in the face of danger, loyalty in companionship, and wisdom in action. The epilogue of their story was not filled with further battles or sudden perils, but with calm reflection, a soothing cadence of completion. Jason and Medea understood that the adventures of the past had shaped the peace of the present. The challenges, once terrifying, now became part of the narrative of life itself, a series of trials leading to growth, understanding, and unity. In this quiet reflection, the story of the Argonauts transformed from one of suspense and struggle into one of gentle triumph, offering comfort, inspiration, and a sense of closure. As the stars emerged, scattered across the velvet sky, a soft breeze carried the scent of the sea and the distant forests, a lullaby of nature itself. Jason and Medea watched the constellations, recalling tales told by their companions of gods, heroes, and mythical beings they had encountered. Each star seemed to symbolize a memory, a challenge overcome, a lesson learned. The Golden Fleece gleamed nearby, serene and untouched, its power now entwined with the stories of courage and wisdom that would echo across generations. In the quiet of that night, the city of Iolcus rested, and so too did the heroes. Jason and Medea, the Argonauts, and the people of the city found in the peaceful hours a moment to breathe, to reflect, and to allow the journey's lessons to settle gently upon their hearts. The adventures, though now complete, would live on as a gentle story to be told again and again. A story of bravery and cunning, of love and loyalty, of trials met with patience and wisdom. It was a story to calm restless minds, to soothe the spirit, and to remind all who heard it that courage and trust, paired with intelligence and care, can navigate even the most turbulent of seas. And so, with the soft sounds of the sea, the quiet whisper of the wind, and the golden glow of the fleece nearby, the story of Jason and the Argonauts came to a peaceful close. The journey had ended, but the lessons and the gentle cadence of their triumph would carry on, offering comfort, inspiration, and the soothing rhythm of an epic adventure finally at rest.